Close your eyes for a moment and imagine this. You're living your normal routine in the United States. It's a Saturday morning in New York, Chicago, or Los Angeles. You grab your shopping list, head over to Walmart or Costco, and load up your cart. But as you scan the shelves, something feels different. A bag of rice that cost you 10 last month is now 15. A loaf of bread has jumped by 30 cents. Fresh vegetables are fewer in stock and more expensive. You swipe your card and convince yourself maybe it's just inflation. Later in the day, you open your Amazon app to finally order that new phone or laptop you've been waiting for. But when you check the delivery date, it's delayed by weeks, sometimes even months. The product description mentions shipping issues. You think to yourself, what's going on? Why can't Amazon, the giant of logistics, deliver on time? That evening, you stop at a gas station to fill up your car. Prices are climbing again, not by cents, but by dollars per gallon compared to last month. You're frustrated. Everyone keeps talking about inflation, global instability, or oil prices. But what if I told you all of these, your grocery bill, your Amazon delivery, and your gas pump price, could all be linked to one single event thousands of miles away, a flood? Yes, a flood. The kind of disaster you usually scroll past on your news feed, watching images of villages underwater in Pakistan, India, or Africa. The kind of tragedy you feel sympathy for, but you also think, that's sad, but it doesn't affect me here in the US. The truth, it does. In fact, it affects you more than you realize, sometimes directly in your pocket. Floods don't just drown homes and displace families. They send shockwaves through the global economy. Let me paint the picture for you. Imagine a massive rice farm in Asia, one of the biggest suppliers to the global food market, completely submerged for weeks. Crops destroyed, livestock swept away. That food shortage doesn't just stay local, it pushes prices up everywhere, including in your Walmart aisle. Now multiply that by wheat in India, vegetables in China, or sugar in Brazil. The ripple effect turns into a global wave. And it's not just food. Floods strike at the heart of supply chains. Think about the electronics you use every day. Your phone, your car's computer chips, even the appliances in your home. Many of those components come from factories in flood-prone regions like Taiwan, Thailand, or China. If those factories are underwater, production stops. And when production stops, your Amazon deliveries slow down, product prices rise, and companies in Silicon Valley struggle to keep up. Suddenly, a flood across the ocean is controlling your tech upgrades. Even fuel isn't safe. Floods often damage oil refineries, gas pipelines, and shipping ports. That creates bottlenecks in supply, driving up the gas prices you see at your neighborhood station. Add to that the fact that insurance companies pay billions in flood damages every year. And how do they recover? By raising premiums, which means whether you live in Miami, Houston, or even Minnesota, your insurance bill creeps higher. Still think floods are only someone else's problem? Let's talk about the financial markets. Investors hate risk. When floods devastate major economies, stock exchanges react. Prices drop, confidence falls, and even Wall Street gets shaky. If you have a 401k, retirement fund, or even basic savings tied to the stock market, you've already felt the invisible impact of these disasters without even realizing it. Now, here's the kicker. Climate change is making all of this worse. Floods are becoming stronger, more unpredictable, and more destructive. Which means the kind of disruptions we're talking about aren't once in a decade anymore. They're happening almost every year. And for Americans, that translates into constant shocks to your cost of living. Higher grocery bills, unstable gas prices, delayed Amazon deliveries, rising insurance costs, and volatile financial markets. So the next time you see footage of a flood overseas, don't just scroll past it thinking it's someone else's tragedy. That flood could be the reason your dinner is more expensive, your car fuel is costlier, your insurance premium is higher, and your Amazon delivery is delayed. In other words, what looks like a local disaster is actually a global chain reaction, and your wallet is part of that chain. And in this video, I'm going to show you exactly how floods, climate change, and global economics are all connected, and why the world's disasters are no longer just headlines, they're part of your everyday life. Human disaster and local economic crash. Let's start with the ground reality, the human and local economic impact of floods. Because before we talk about supply chains, Wall Street, or your Amazon delivery, we need to understand how devastating floods are on the very communities they strike. Imagine waking up one morning in your hometown. Everything seems normal until the rain doesn't stop. The river that once flowed peacefully near your house begins to rise. By afternoon, it's no longer a river. It's a wall of water racing through streets. People rush to grab essentials. Parents carry children on their shoulders. Families climb to rooftops. And in a matter of hours, homes that took decades to build are underwater. This isn't just a scene from a disaster movie. It's reality for millions of people every year across Asia, Africa, and even the United States. From Hurricane Katrina in New Orleans to the devastating floods in Pakistan in 2022, the pattern is the same. When water rises, economies sink. Let's break this down. The first and most obvious economic hit comes at the household level. Families lose everything: homes, savings, belongings, sometimes even the land they owned. In the US, insurance might cover part of the damage, but in most countries, families are left with nothing but debt. Imagine a farmer in South Asia who borrowed money to plant rice for the season. Overnight, his fields are underwater, his crop is gone, but his loan remains. For him, the flood is not just water, it's bankruptcy. Now shift that same scenario to the US. Imagine a small business owner in Houston running a coffee shop. A hurricane hits, flooding his store. His espresso machines are ruined, the floor is destroyed. Customers can't come in for weeks. Even with insurance, the paperwork takes months, maybe years to process. Meanwhile, he can't pay rent, employees lose their jobs, and the local economy starts crumbling one shop at a time. And that's just the beginning. Floods wipe out jobs faster than almost any disaster. Factories shut down, farms stop producing, transportation halts. A city that was buzzing with activity yesterday becomes silent today. When people can't work, they can't earn. When they can't earn, they can't spend. And when spending stops, the entire economy slows down like a machine losing fuel. The impact doesn't stop at individual families. Local governments take a massive hit too. Every disaster demands emergency spending: boats, helicopters, rescue teams, medical aid, food supplies, and temporary shelters. None of this comes cheap. In the US, FEMA's Federal Emergency Management Agency spends billions every year on flood recovery. In developing countries, where budgets are already stretched thin, governments are forced to take loans or cut spending from schools, healthcare, and infrastructure projects just to deal with the flood. Think about what that means. A child in that country might not get a new school building because the government had to rebuild a washed-out bridge instead. A hospital may not get modern equipment because funds were diverted to flood recovery. The future is delayed because the present is drowning. Another layer is the psychological and social cost. Floods don't just destroy homes, they destroy hope. People migrate from villages to overcrowded cities in search of work, creating urban slums. Families are torn apart. Education gets disrupted as schools double up as shelters. In the US, we've seen similar displacement. After Hurricane Katrina, thousands of families had to leave New Orleans permanently. That wasn't just a human tragedy. It was an economic shock to the entire region. Now let's connect this to numbers. According to the World Bank, Floods cause an average of 65 billion in damages globally every year. And that number is rising as climate change makes floods more frequent and more severe. But here's the thing, those are just the direct damages. The indirect costs, lost jobs, lost productivity, disrupted education, mental health crises are far greater. Economists estimate the true economic impact could be double or even triple the official figures. Let's zoom into agriculture because floods are merciless to farmers. Crops don't just die, the fertile topsoil gets washed away. In places like South Asia, it can take years for soil to recover, meaning entire communities face food shortages for seasons to come. For Americans, the closest comparison would be a sudden drought or hurricane wiping out Midwest cornfields. Imagine the ripple effect from corn syrup in your soda to animal feed to biofuel. Everything would suddenly become more expensive. That's exactly what floods do on the other side of the globe. And because trade is global, the effect hits you at home too. Another key factor is infrastructure collapse. Roads, bridges, power lines, hospitals, all destroyed in hours. Rebuilding them isn't a matter of days or weeks, it takes years. For example, the 2011 floods in Thailand didn't just affect Thai citizens. They shut down industrial parks where global car companies had factories. Production slowed worldwide, and even US car prices ticked upward. A single flood delayed thousands of car shipments. But let's come back to the local scene, because that's where it all starts. Imagine being a teacher in a small town that has been flooded. Your school is destroyed, your students are scattered, your home is gone. What do? For many, the only option is to move to another city, start over, and hope for government aid. This displacement creates a chain reaction. Smaller towns get emptier, bigger cities get more crowded, and the local economy takes years, sometimes decades, to recover. And here's something most people don't realize: floods are poverty traps. Wealthy families may recover by moving, rebuilding, or using savings. Poor families don't have that option. Once their belongings are washed away, they're pushed deeper into debt, sometimes for life. In the US, you might see this in how low-income neighborhoods suffer longer after hurricanes compared to wealthier areas. Globally, it's even more extreme. Floods create permanent inequality. So when we talk about floods, we're not just talking about water on the streets. We're talking about entire economic systems collapsing. Families losing generations of savings. Farmers falling into debt traps. Businesses shutting their doors forever. Governments draining their budgets on emergency response instead of future growth. Communities breaking apart and never fully recovering. And that's why floods are not just natural disasters. They are economic earthquakes. The ground may not shake, but the financial foundations of societies do. Every family that loses a home is also a consumer loss to the market. Every farm that floods is a supply chain broken. Every government dollar spent on recovery is a dollar not spent on innovation or progress. This is part one of the story: the human and local economic crash. The heartbreaking truth is this is only the beginning, because once these local disasters pile up, they begin to ripple outward. And that's where part two comes in. When floods don't just affect families and towns, but the entire global supply chain, and eventually your own daily life in the US, supply chains, and the global trade domino effect. Now that we've seen how floods devastate families and local communities, let's take a step back and look at the bigger picture, the global supply chain. Because in today's world, no economy stands alone. Every product you touch, every service you enjoy is connected to a complex web of trade that stretches across oceans. And when floods hit one part of that web, the shock travels across the globe, straight to your doorstep in the United States. Think of the global economy like Amazon's fulfillment network. Packages don't magically appear at your door. They move through a system of warehouses, trucks, planes, and delivery vans. If just one warehouse floods, the entire chain is delayed. Orders pile up, shipping slows down, and customers across the country feel the effect. The same is true of the world economy. If one country, one warehouse in the global system is hit by floods, everyone feels the ripple. Let's start with agriculture, the backbone of global trade. Rice from Asia, wheat from India, corn from Brazil, soybeans from Argentina. These aren't just local products, they're global commodities. When floods hit these farmlands, the crops don't just vanish locally, they disappear from global markets. And when supply drops but demand stays the same, prices skyrocket. That's basic economics. So the flood that drowns rice fields in Pakistan or wheat farms in India can make your grocery bill at Walmart or Costco jump here in the US. And it's not just raw crops. Floods disrupt entire food supply chains. Let's say floods in Thailand wipe out rice harvest. Thailand is one of the biggest rice exporters in the world. Suddenly, importers across Africa, the Middle East, and even US suppliers are scrambling to buy rice from fewer sources. The competition drives up global prices. The result? You standing in a supermarket in Chicago, paying more for something you never thought twice about before. Now let's zoom into manufacturing. Many of the products Americans use daily come from regions prone to floods. Take electronics, for example. Taiwan and Thailand are critical hubs for semiconductors, the tiny chips that power everything from your iPhone to your car. In 2011, floods in Thailand disrupted semiconductor factories so badly that global production slowed for months. Car companies from Toyota to Ford reported delays. Even computer hard drives became scarce, prices doubled, and consumers worldwide felt it. Imagine needing a laptop for college, only to find prices have jumped by hundreds of dollars because a flood 8,000 miles away stopped a factory. That's how interconnected we are. Floods also hammer global trade routes. Ports, highways, and railroads, the arteries of global commerce, get submerged. When a major port floods, shipping containers stack up like traffic jams on a freeway. Goods don't move, ships are delayed, and companies lose billions every day. In 2020, when hurricanes hit Gulf Coast ports in the US, global oil shipments slowed and fuel prices spiked. That's just one region. Now imagine similar disruptions in Asia, where the majority of goods you order on Amazon are shipped from. Suddenly, your Prime delivery isn't arriving in 2 days. It's delayed by weeks, sometimes months. And here's something most people overlook. Floods raise shipping costs. When trade routes are blocked, shipping companies take longer, more expensive routes. Insurance for cargo rises because of the higher risk. Fuel costs climb as ships idle waiting for ports to reopen. All these costs don't stay with the shipping companies. They're passed on to you, the consumer. That's why a pair of sneakers, a smartphone, or even furniture you buy online can suddenly cost more after a flood halfway around the world. Let's bring this closer to daily American life. Imagine you're a parent in Dallas ordering school supplies online. The notebooks and backpacks are made in Vietnam. Suddenly, Vietnam faces a flood that shuts down its factories. The order is delayed, prices climb, and your child starts school without the supplies you thought were guaranteed. Or think of car owners in Los Angeles waiting for parts. A shipment from Asia is delayed due to floods, and your repair bill suddenly spikes because the mechanic has to pay more for scarce parts. These aren't rare events, they're becoming normal as climate disasters increase. Another critical example is oil and gas. Floods disrupt oil refineries and pipelines, both in the US and abroad. When production slows, the global supply of oil tightens. And since oil is traded on a global market, even a local flood in Nigeria or the Gulf of Mexico can push up the price of gas in New York or Chicago. Remember when gas prices jumped and everyone blamed inflation or politics? Sometimes, the hidden culprit is a flood that never made it to US headlines. Now let's talk about trade balance. Countries that depend on exports, like Vietnam for textiles, India for agriculture, or China for electronics, face huge revenue losses during floods. That loss makes them import more, shifting global demand and pushing prices up in other markets. For Americans, this means inflation doesn't just come from Washington policies. It comes from global floods that shift trade flows. And let's not forget the corporate side. When floods hit supplier countries, U.S. corporations feel it directly. Apple, for example, relies on factories across Asia. When floods delay production, Apple's profits dip, its stock wobbles, and guess who feels it? Millions of Americans with retirement accounts tied to the stock market. That's how a flood overseas shakes Wall Street. Another invisible cost is the trust factor. Companies rely on predictable supply chains. When floods repeatedly disrupt certain regions, corporations start moving factories elsewhere. That sounds like a solution, but it's costly. Building new factories, training workers, and shifting logistics takes years and billions of dollars. Those costs eventually make their way back into the price of your phone, your car, or your clothes. And here's the kicker. The more globalized the world becomes, the more fragile the system is to floods. In the 20th century, if one region flooded, the impact was mostly local. Today, because every product is made from parts sourced globally, a flood in one place affects industries everywhere. Your car isn't made in one country. It's assembled from parts across 10 or 20 nations. If even one part is delayed, the whole car is delayed. To visualize this, think of the 2021 microchip shortage. It wasn't caused by floods, but it showed how one missing piece can stop entire industries. Now imagine adding floods into that equation. When a region that produces those chips floods, the shortage becomes worse, dragging down industries from cars to computers. So, what's the takeaway here? Floods don't just wash away homes and crops. They jam the gears of global trade. They create shortages, delay deliveries, increase shipping costs, and shake up supply chains that we depend on for daily life. For an American family, this means higher grocery bills, more expensive electronics, delayed Amazon orders, and rising gas prices. And the scary truth is, as floods become more frequent due to climate change, these disruptions aren't one-time shocks. They are recurring tremors in the global economy. Every year, somewhere in the world, a flood is quietly raising your cost of living in the U.S. You might not see it on the news, but you feel it at the checkout counter, the gas pump, and your delivery tracking page. That's the domino effect of floods on the global supply chain. A single drop in one country can cause a financial wave across the entire planet. And in part 3, we'll look at where this hits hardest, our food security. Because when the world's breadbaskets flood, it's not just about higher prices. It's about whether shelves in America stay stocked at all. Floods, agriculture, and food security, from farms to your fork. Now let's talk about the one thing every single human being depends on: food. If supply chains are the veins of the global economy, then agriculture is its beating heart. And when floods strike, they don't just ruin buildings and roads, they destroy that heart. They wipe out crops, drown livestock, and wash away the fertile soil that farmers rely on for generations. The result? Food insecurity that spreads far beyond the flooded fields, all the way to your dinner plate in America. Let's start with a simple image. Picture a farmer in South Asia. He spent months preparing his rice fields, planting seeds, caring for his land. His entire year's income depends on this harvest. Then, in a matter of days, heavy monsoon rains unleash a flood that submerges his fields. The crop is gone. The farmer is left with debt, despair, and nothing to feed his family. For him, the tragedy is personal. But for the world, the tragedy is economic. That rice was destined not only for local tables, but for export markets. And now it's gone. Here's where the ripple begins. Asia produces about 90% of the world's rice. When one major rice-producing country suffers a flood, like Thailand, India, or Pakistan, the global rice supply shrinks. Importing countries scramble to find alternatives. Prices surge, and before you know it, the bag of rice sitting on the Walmart shelf in New York, Chicago, or Dallas has jumped in price. You didn't live through the flood. You never saw the farmers' destroyed fields. But you're paying for it anyway. It's not just rice. Wheat, corn, soybeans, sugar, coffee. These global staples are all vulnerable to floods. Let's take wheat as an example. India and China are among the world's largest wheat producers. In 2022, when India faced unexpected heavy rains and floods, wheat crops were devastated. Global wheat prices surged. American consumers felt it in bread, pasta, and even fast food buns. That burger you bought at McDonald's, the bun may have cost the restaurant a few cents more to produce, but multiplied across millions of burgers, those costs eventually trickle into menu prices. Corn tells a similar story. It's not just food for humans, it's animal feed and even a source of biofuel. When floods hit cornfields in Brazil or the US Midwest, global feed prices climb. That raises the cost of meat, milk, and eggs worldwide. So when you see higher prices at Chipotle for chicken bowls or at the grocery store for eggs, floods might be part of the invisible chain reaction behind it. Let's zoom in on the US experience. Hurricane Katrina didn't just flood New Orleans. It damaged farmland, disrupted grain exports through the Mississippi River, and sent shockwaves into global food markets. More recently, flooding in the Midwest in 2019 drowned millions of acres of corn and soybean fields. Farmers lost billions, but it wasn't just their loss, it was yours too. Food processors had to pay more for raw materials, which raised costs for everything from snacks to cooking oil. Consumers across America paid the price at checkout. One of the most devastating aspects of floods is soil erosion. Crops can be replanted, but fertile topsoil takes years, even decades, to recover. When floods wash away nutrient-rich soil, future harvests are compromised. This means that the impact of a flood isn't just one bad season. It can cripple agricultural output for years. For countries that rely heavily on farming, this is an economic death sentence. And for the global market, it's a ticking time bomb that raises long-term prices and creates shortages. Now, let's talk about livestock. Floods don't just ruin crops, they kill animals, chickens, cows, pigs. Entire herds can be lost in a single flood event. For example, in 2015, floods in Myanmar killed tens of thousands of livestock. In the US, Hurricane Florence in 2018 drowned millions of chickens and pigs in North Carolina. That's not just a tragedy for farmers, it's a direct hit on the meat supply. The fewer animals available, the higher the price of meat in supermarkets. Floods also contaminate water supplies, leading to outbreaks of disease in animals and humans. This further reduces agricultural productivity and increases healthcare costs. For Americans, this might seem distant, but it's not. Many of the fruits, vegetables, coffee beans, and spices you enjoy are imported from flood-prone regions. A flood in Colombia can affect your morning coffee. A flood in Mexico can raise the price of avocados for your guacamole. A flood in California's Central Valley, which supplies a large share of U.S. produce, can make nationwide headlines when lettuce, almonds, or tomatoes become scarce and costly. Food insecurity also creates political instability. When people can't afford food, protests erupt. Governments destabilize and trade policies shift. This isn't just a problem for those countries. It affects U.S. foreign policy, international trade agreements, and ultimately your wallet. Remember the Arab Spring in 2011? Rising food prices, partly triggered by global crop failures, played a key role in sparking unrest. Floods are one of the silent drivers behind such crises. Another invisible cost is food inflation. Economists often track inflation through energy and housing. But food inflation is one of the most dangerous. When basic staples like rice, wheat, and vegetables rise in price, it hits lower and middle-income families the hardest. Wealthier households can absorb the increase, but everyday families struggle. That struggle can reduce spending in other areas, from retail shopping to travel, slowing the economy overall. And here's the bigger issue. Climate change is amplifying all of this. Floods are becoming more frequent and severe, hitting multiple agricultural regions in the same year. In the past, if one country faced crop failure, others could make up the difference. Today, simultaneous floods in multiple regions mean shortages are global, not local. For example, in 2022 and 2023, multiple countries faced flood-related crop losses at the same time. Global food prices soared and millions faced hunger. Even in the US, families noticed their grocery bills climbing every week. Now, let's connect this directly to your daily life in America. Think about your weekly grocery trip. You load your cart with bread, milk, eggs, rice, fruits, vegetables, maybe some chicken or beef. Each of those items is linked to a global chain of agriculture. Bread depends on wheat. Milk and meat depend on feed, corn and soy. Fruits and vegetables often come from countries vulnerable to floods. When floods wipe out even one of these links, the entire chain feels the strain, and your total at the checkout counter goes up. It's not just grocery stores. Restaurants also pass on costs. That Chipotle burrito bowl, more expensive if avocados flood in Mexico or beans flood in Brazil. Starbucks latte, more expensive if coffee plantations flood in Colombia. Even fast food giants like McDonald's, Burger King, or Taco Bell feel it. They buy ingredients in bulk, and when bulk prices rise due to floods, menu prices rise too. Suddenly, your value meal doesn't feel so valuable anymore. But beyond prices, floods raise a scarier question: availability. What happens when shelves don't just show higher prices, but actual shortages? We got a small taste of this during the pandemic when supply chains were disrupted. Empty shelves shocked Americans who were used to abundance. Floods can do the same thing, only instead of toilet paper, it could be rice, wheat, or even baby formula. Imagine walking into Costco and seeing ration limits on basic food items because global floods have cut supply. That's not science fiction. It's a scenario economists already warn about. So when we talk about floods and agriculture, we're really talking about the foundation of global stability. Food is the most basic need. If floods disrupt it, everything else, from prices to politics, spirals. For the American consumer, that means more expensive groceries, pricier restaurant meals, and even occasional shortages. For the global economy, it means instability, inflation, and unrest. And here's the sobering truth: floods don't just destroy farms, they destroy confidence in the global food system. Once that confidence is gone, prices climb even faster as countries hoard supplies, ban exports, and protect their own populations first. The world becomes more fragmented, and the US consumer, who has long benefited from global abundance, suddenly faces scarcity. That's the reality of floods and agriculture. They turn local disasters into global food crises. They take a farmer's ruined field in Asia and turn it into a higher grocery bill in America. They take drowned livestock in Africa and make meat more expensive in Los Angeles. They take washed out soil in India and turn it into higher bread prices in Chicago. In other words, when floods hit agriculture, they hit all of us. Floods and infrastructure, the hidden bill that always lands in your mailbox. Up until now, we've talked about floods shaking up supply chains and destroying agriculture. But let's take a closer look at something even more expensive, something every flood silently devours: infrastructure. When you think of infrastructure, think of the skeleton of the economy: roads, bridges, railways, airports, ports, power grids, pipelines, schools, hospitals, and even the internet cables that keep us connected. Every modern economy rests on this skeleton. And when floods tear it apart, the costs don't just fall on governments or businesses. They land right in your lap as a taxpayer, consumer, and homeowner. Let me paint a picture. Imagine waking up in Houston, Texas during Hurricane Harvey in 2017. You turn on the news and you see highways completely submerged, cars floating like toys in a bathtub, entire neighborhoods cut off, airports closed, power grids failing, trains and trucks that normally carry goods across the country stopped. Now here's the kicker. Repairing that damage didn't cost a few $1,000,000. It cost over $125 billion in total damages. Who pays for that? Insurance companies, yes. Federal and state governments, yes. But at the end of the day, taxpayers and consumers foot the bill. Through higher insurance premiums, higher taxes, and higher prices for goods and services. And it's not just Harvey. Every major flood in the US racks up billions. Katrina, over $160 billion in damages. The 2019 Midwest floods, over $20 billion in damages, mostly from destroyed levees, railways, and farmlands. Hurricane Ida in 2021, over $775 billion. And remember, that's just the US. When you add global floods, like the devastating 2022 floods in Pakistan that wiped out bridges, homes, and roads, the combined costs shoot into the hundreds of billions every year. Here's the domino effect. Floods don't just knock out one road or one bridge. They cripple networks. When a bridge collapses, trucks have to take longer detours. That means more fuel, more time, and more cost. When a railway is submerged, trains carrying coal, grain, or cars are delayed. That raises costs for factories and power plants. When an airport shuts down, flights are canceled, goods are delayed, and global trade is disrupted. In the modern world, every extra hour of delay is money lost. Multiply that across millions of transactions, and you're staring at a global bill that sneaks its way into your electricity rates, your shipping costs, and even the price of your Amazon Prime delivery. Let's take the power grid as an example. Floods often knock out substations, damage transformers, and short-circuit entire electrical systems. Remember when Hurricane Sandy hit New York and New Jersey in 2012? Millions were without power for weeks. Businesses shut down, subways flooded, gas stations couldn't pump fuel because they had no electricity. Hospitals ran on emergency generators. The total damage, around $7 billion. But here's what few people realize. Much of that cost was passed along in the years that followed through higher utility bills, rebuilding taxes, and higher insurance rates. Now imagine you're a small business owner in Miami. A flood takes out your store. Insurance pays some of it, but not everything. You're forced to take out loans, raise prices, or even shut down. Multiply your story by tens of thousands of small businesses, and suddenly the local economy is gasping for air. That's why so many businesses never reopen after major floods. Studies show that about 40% of small businesses hit by disasters like floods close permanently. And when they close, jobs vanish, tax revenues shrink, and communities decline. The US government does step in with disaster relief funds. FEMA, for example, spends billions every year helping rebuild homes, schools, and public works. But FEMA money doesn't fall from the sky. It comes from the taxes you and I pay. Every time the government writes a $10 billion check for flood recovery, that money is essentially borrowed from taxpayers, either through higher taxes, increased debt, or inflationary spending. And even if you live in Arizona or Nevada, places that rarely flood, you're still paying for flood damages in Louisiana, Florida, and New York. Insurance is another silent player. At first, it looks like insurance companies take the hit. But after a flood year with massive payouts, what do? They raise premiums. Homeowners in flood-prone areas see their insurance costs skyrocket. Even people outside flood zones feel the squeeze because insurers spread risk across their customer base. That means your car insurance, your renter's insurance, even your business coverage might creep upward. all because floods hit someone hundreds of miles away. And let's not forget about the National Flood Insurance Program, CNFIP. Millions of U.S. homeowners rely on it because private insurers won't touch high-risk flood areas. But NFIP is already tens of billions in debt. Why? Because floods keep costing more than the premiums collected. That debt doesn't vanish. It gets absorbed by the federal government, which again means taxpayers. So whether you live near a river or in the middle of the desert, you're paying for flood insurance deficits. Globally, the picture is even bleaker. In developing countries, governments often don't have the funds to rebuild quickly. Roads stay broken, bridges remain collapsed, and schools lie in ruins. That slows economic recovery for years, sometimes decades. But here's the twist: global companies, many of them based in the U.S., depend on those countries for resources, factories, and labor. So when floods delay rebuilding abroad, American companies suffer too. Think about Apple relying on supply chains in Asia, or Nike relying on factories in Vietnam. A flood that wipes out infrastructure there delays production here. Consumers face shortages, delays, and higher costs. Infrastructure also includes something we often overlook: digital infrastructure. In 2021, heavy floods in Germany damaged not just homes and highways, but also internet cables and cell towers. Thousands of people lost communication for weeks. In the US, similar risks exist. Floods can wipe out server farms, disrupt undersea internet cables, and destroy local data centers. In a digital economy where everything from banking to healthcare to shopping depends on connectivity, even a short blackout costs billions. For you, that could mean delayed paychecks, interrupted online classes, or canceled telehealth appointments. Now let's connect it back to your everyday American life. You drive to work, and your commute is longer because a highway is still under repair from last year's floods. You get your utility bill, and it's higher because your state had to rebuild power lines. You pay your taxes, and part of it goes to federal disaster relief for flood-hit areas. You renew your insurance, and the premium is higher because floods drained company reserves. Even if you've never seen floodwaters touch your street, your wallet is being drained by floods indirectly. Here's a less obvious opportunity cost. Every dollar spent on rebuilding flood-damaged infrastructure is a dollar not spent on building new schools, healthcare programs, or renewable energy projects. Instead of advancing, societies are forced to constantly repair what was destroyed. Imagine running a business where instead of investing in growth, you're always fixing broken machines. That's exactly what floods do to nations. They keep us stuck in a cycle of repair instead of progress. Floods, migration, and the future of economies when water forces people to move. Up until now, we've explored how floods disrupt supply chains, destroy agriculture, and rack up billions in rebuilding costs. But there's one ripple effect that doesn't just last months or years. It lasts generations. Floods force people to move. They push families out of homes, communities out of towns, and sometimes entire populations out of regions. And when people move, economies shift, locally, nationally, and even globally. Let's start with a simple truth: every flood has a human cost. When water rises, homes are lost. Sometimes it takes days, sometimes hours, but the result is the same. Families displaced, workers uprooted, businesses abandoned. In the U.S., floods are already the leading cause of disaster-related displacement. After Hurricane Katrina in 2005, over 1 million people were forced to evacuate New Orleans and surrounding areas. Some returned, but tens of thousands never did. That permanent migration reshaped not only New Orleans, but also Houston, Atlanta, Dallas, and other cities where displaced families resettled. Think about it: schools suddenly had new students, job markets saw an influx of workers, housing demand surged, and social services stretched thin. A single flood didn't just damage New Orleans, it reshaped the demographics of multiple American cities. Now expand that lens globally. The 2022 floods in Pakistan displaced more than 33 million people. Imagine a population nearly the size of California's suddenly being pushed out of their homes. While many rebuilt, millions migrated to other regions permanently. And here's the catch: when large populations migrate due to floods, they don't just move people, they move economies. Labor shifts, housing markets shift, demand for resources shifts, and sometimes even political power shifts. In the US, this is becoming more urgent with climate change. Coastal cities like Miami, New York, and New Orleans face rising sea levels. Scientists predict that by 2050, over 13 million Americans could be displaced by flooding and sea level rise. That's not science fiction. It's already happening in places like Louisiana's Isle de Jean Charles, where residents became the first federally recognized climate refugees. After repeated floods swallowed their land, families had to be permanently relocated inland. And this isn't a one-off case. Across Florida, North Carolina, and Texas, homeowners in flood-prone areas are already moving away, selling houses at discounts, or abandoning them altogether. Economists call this climate gentrification, where wealthier residents move into safer, higher elevation areas, while vulnerable communities get pushed out. So what does this mean for the economy? First, migration changes housing markets. When floods push people out of one area, demand for homes in safer areas spikes. That drives prices up in receiving cities, often creating housing shortages. At the same time, property values in flood-prone regions collapse. If no one wants to buy a home in a high-risk flood zone, those neighborhoods lose wealth, tax revenue, and investment. And when tax bases shrink, local governments have less money for schools, hospitals, and public services, creating a downward spiral. Second, migration reshapes labor markets. Think about it: when thousands of workers move, they take their skills, their jobs, and their families with them. If a flood wipes out an agricultural town, farm workers might migrate to nearby cities, flooding the local labor supply. That puts pressure on wages and creates new competition for jobs. Meanwhile, the original town loses its workforce, making it harder for businesses to recover. We saw this after Katrina. New Orleans struggled with labor shortages for years, while Houston saw surges in construction, service, and retail jobs because of incoming migrants. Third, migration impacts social systems. When floods force large numbers of people into new regions, schools suddenly have to serve more students. Healthcare systems face more patients, and transportation networks get overcrowded. If the receiving city is prepared, this can fuel growth. But if it's unprepared, it can spark social tensions, economic inequality, and political debates over resources. Globally, the stakes are even higher. In Asia and Africa, where many economies depend on flood-prone river systems, millions face permanent displacement in the coming decades. The World Bank estimates that by 2050, over 200 million people worldwide could be displaced due to climate-related disasters, especially floods. That mass migration will trigger global economic shifts. Countries receiving migrants may face pressure on jobs, housing, and resources, but they could also benefit from new labor, innovation, and cultural exchange. For Americans, this matters more than you might think. Why? Because U.S. companies rely on global labor markets. If millions of workers are displaced in Bangladesh, Vietnam, or Indonesia, major manufacturing hubs, it disrupts global supply chains. That means higher costs for clothes, electronics, and even food. In the U.S., migration isn't just a local issue. It's deeply tied to your wallet, your job, and your nation's competitiveness. But there's another layer here: future economies. Migration doesn't just move people. It changes what economies look like 10, 20, even 50 years down the road. When flood-prone areas lose population, they lose tax revenue, investment, and talent. Over time, those areas might decline permanently. turning into ghost regions. Meanwhile, safer regions may boom, attracting businesses, universities, and industries. In other words, floods don't just damage today's economy. They redraw the economic map of tomorrow. Let's take Miami as an example. Right now, Miami is one of the fastest growing cities in the U.S., attracting tech companies, finance, and international trade. But it's also one of the most flood-prone cities with regular, sunny day floods, where water rises even without storms. If sea levels rise as predicted, large parts of Miami could become unlivable by mid-century. What happens then? Those businesses, investors, and workers will relocate. Maybe to Atlanta, maybe to Austin, maybe to New York. That migration will shift wealth and opportunity away from Miami and toward safer cities. The same is true for other global cities like Bangkok, Jakarta, and Lagos. This also creates new business opportunities, companies that can provide housing, infrastructure, and jobs in safer regions will thrive. Industries like construction, renewable energy, water management, and insurance will adapt and profit. Cities that invest early in flood resilience, like Rotterdam in the Netherlands or New York with its Big U seawall project, could attract global capital because investors and workers will prefer safe zones. In this sense, floods act as a market signal, telling us where future economies will thrive and where they will shrink. But there's a human side too. Migration caused by floods doesn't just mean moving homes. It means losing heritage, community, and identity. When families leave towns that have existed for centuries, cultures disappear. Think of Louisiana's Cajun communities that lost land to floods and hurricanes. Their music, traditions, and way of life are fading, not just because of cultural change, but because of rising waters. Economies measure dollars, but floods also erase stories. Now, let's zoom out. What does all this mean for you? Sitting in the U.S. watching this vlog, it means that floods are not just about the people who lose homes on the news. They're about you. Your future job, your taxes, your housing market, your insurance, your economy. If millions of Americans are displaced over the next decades, it will reshape where businesses operate, where jobs exist, where schools thrive, and where investments flow. If millions globally are displaced, it will reshape trade, migration policy, and even global politics. Floods are not just temporary disasters. They're long-term economic forces. They move people, and when people move, money, jobs, and power move with them. That's why every flood is more than just a local tragedy. It's a global event. So here's the big question for America and the world. Will we invest in resilience, in stronger infrastructure, smarter housing, and proactive migration planning? Or will we wait for floods to push people out unprepared and let economies crumble under the weight of unmanaged change? Because make no mistake, floods will keep coming, and with every flood, the map of tomorrow's economy gets redrawn. So the next time you hear about a flood, whether in Miami, Houston, or halfway across the world, don't just see water, see the future of migration, see the reshaping of labor markets, see the seeds of a new economy being forced into existence, and ask yourself, where will people move? Where will jobs move? And how will you adapt when the floods that look distant today rewrite the story of your tomorrow? From floodwaters to future, why this matters to you. As we come to the end of this journey, let's pause for a moment. We've talked about supply chains, agriculture, rebuilding costs, migration, and even the reshaping of entire economies. But beneath all those numbers and statistics, one truth stands tall: floods are not just natural events. They are economic earthquakes, silent reshapers of the world we live in. If you live in the U.S., you might think floods are a problem for Asia, for Africa, for island nations far away. But the truth is, they are already at America's doorstep. From the Mississippi River Basin to the coasts of Florida and New York, floods are costing billions, displacing families, and rewriting the future of cities. Every time a hurricane hits, every time a river overflows, every time a neighborhood floods, America loses money, jobs, and opportunities. And globally, the ripples spread back to your life through higher food prices, delayed shipments, costlier insurance, and rising taxes to fund disaster aid. But here's the deeper story: floods don't just destroy, they reveal. They reveal weaknesses in our systems, in our infrastructure, in our planning. They reveal how connected we all are. A flood in Pakistan affects cotton prices in Texas. A flood in Vietnam affects electronics in California. A flood in Miami pushes workers and investors to safer cities, changing where jobs exist. In this way, water is the great connector. It shows us that in the global economy, no one stands alone. Now, here's the part I want you to take home. Floods also give us a choice. We can either see them as unstoppable disasters, shrug our shoulders, and wait for the next wave, or we can treat them as warnings, as wake-up calls to build smarter, stronger, and fairer economies. Imagine this: stronger levees, smarter cities built with climate in mind, affordable insurance systems that actually work, and investments in renewable energy to reduce climate risks. Imagine education systems teaching the next generation not just how to rebuild, but how to prevent. Imagine America leading the world in resilience, not just reacting to floods, but predicting them, preventing their worst impacts, and innovating solutions the world can use. This isn't just fantasy. Cities like Rotterdam in the Netherlands have already reimagined living with water. Singapore has turned stormwater into a national resource. Even in the US, New York's Big U project is a glimpse of how infrastructure can protect millions. The question is, will we scale it up, or will we keep waiting for the next billion-dollar flood before acting? And here's where you come in. Yes, you watching this video, you are not powerless. You can raise awareness. You can vote for leaders who prioritize climate resilience. You can support businesses that invest in sustainable practices. And you can make your own home and community more flood ready. If enough of us act, the tide can turn, not against water itself, but against the destruction it causes. So let me leave you with this. The next time you see a headline about flooding, don't scroll past it. Don't think of it as someone else's problem. Remember, that water will find its way to you through your grocery bill, your taxes, your job market, or even your neighborhood. We are all in the same boat, whether we realize it or not. Floods may wash away homes, but they also wash away illusions. The illusion that we are separate. The illusion that tomorrow will look exactly like today. The reality is this: floods are shaping the economy of the future, and that future belongs to all of us. So here's my challenge to you. Talk about this with your friends and family. Share this video so more people understand the hidden economic costs of floods. Push for solutions in your city and your country. And most importantly, don't underestimate your voice. One informed person can inspire a movement, and a movement can reshape the future. Because if we act together, floods won't just be stories of destruction. They can be turning points, moments when humanity chose to rise above the waters and build a stronger, safer, more connected world. Thank you for watching, for thinking, and for caring. If you found this eye-opening, hit the like button. Subscribe for more deep dives into global economics, and let's keep this conversation flowing. After all, knowledge is power, and in the face of floods, power is the only thing that keeps us afloat. Please my video, like, subscribe, and blank button for see more important videos.